Hi, welcome to Mr. Dyer's Musings. I'm Mr. Dyer. Thank you for joining me today for part 2 of the Civil War Ambulance Corps of the Union Army. As always, I'd like to thank my wife and family for their continued support, my students for theirs, and thank you for checking out my video. I appreciate it sincerely. I urge you to check out my channel and see if there's something else that you may like. There's a lot of videos on there, especially about the medical side of the hobby, and even Union officers and specific artifacts that I use in my videos. All right, so let's talk about the Ambulance Corps. In my last video, I discussed about General Orders 147 and how that was the spark that finally lit the movement to standardize the ambulance system during the American Civil War. General Orders 147, like I mentioned in my previous video, was only for the Army of Potomac. The Western Theater did not have such an order. What happened in the East generally kind of filtered out westward, and I'll get to that towards the end of the video, and how we can see the change happen, and it's a catalyst where we see suddenly in 1864, everybody agrees that Jonathan Letterman's plan was effective and it should be adopted across the board. But we're not there yet. So General Orders 147 basically gave us the framework for how the ambulance system was going to be established. It told us how many officers are going to be involved, how many enlisted ambulances. We see that there's going to be a forge that's given to each regiment for ambulance service, and we're going to see that saddlers are going to be given just for the ambulance service. And why is that? Just like my last video, it explains that we are trying to break away from the quartermaster's department because the ambulance system was tied to the quartermaster's department and it just wasn't effective. You had officers that were using the ambulance system for their own personal use, for baggage, etc. You also had a problem with getting supplies in an appropriate way and appropriate time. So we finally see this breakaway, and as an entity under 147, the Ambulance Corps can finally work by itself. It also establishes the triage system. Now, before Letterman's system, there really wasn't much of a triage. It was kind of a jumbled up mess. Reason being is because money. It all comes down to money, right? And it comes down to priority too. Priority of an army is to win battles, fight battles, and get the war over, right? So the wounded kind of take a back seat. They get pushed on the back burner. But it also comes down to money, especially when we talk about how the army is now comprised. When the war first broke out, there was a very small U.S. national standing army with Abraham Lincoln's call for volunteers and troops. That grew exponentially, and it's because of state troops. So I'm from Ohio, and I represent a soldier that enlisted in an Ohio regiment. That means I'm going to get paid by the state of Ohio. My officers are going to be Ohio. We get tied to our state governor, but under a time of war, obviously the president takes over as commander-in-chief. But for the most part, the money aspect comes from my state of Ohio. So if you have someone who is wounded on the battlefield and they get moved to a dressing station or a field hospital, for them to get the appropriate care, they need to go to their state's hospital because there's a conflict where states didn't want to pay the money because it costs a lot for medical care. They didn't want to pay for the supplies. They didn't want to give they obviously wanted to focus on their own soldiers. And after a battle, especially at night, it can be very difficult for an ambulance driver to find a specific state hospital. They might have someone from Illinois, they might have someone from Pennsylvania, might have someone from Ohio, and they need to find all these different hospitals to make sure that they get their appropriate care. Well, thankfully, the national government is going to come around and they're going to reimburse states for the use of the medical care that they get. So this takes that burden off, and it makes things a little bit easier to navigate. Now soldiers can go to whatever field hospital that they get to first, and they can get immediate care. But you also don't have a standardized system on removal of wounded from the field to the field hospital. A lot of times you got these guys, these slackers who are assigned to do ambulance duty, so they don't care anyways. They're slackers to begin with, so they're just taking their time, or they're not being efficient about removing the wounded. You also have the use of bands people, and those people have no interest in being an ambulance driver or a stretcher bearer. They're more worried about the music and trying to build morale and whatever they were trained in, right? So that's not very efficient. In fact, Dr. Wilder, in a book that I usually get a lot of details from, he complains even in 1864 how the bandsmen were used for ambulatory service, and he was disgusted at the efficiency and their quality of work, even in 1864. And he was one of the few regiments that actually still had a band. It was up to the states. Most units got rid of their bands by then. Okay, so how does the triage system look under Letterman's plan? A soldier will be removed from the line of battle by a trained ambulance corpsman, not by their buddy, not by a slacker, not by a bandsman, etc. They're going to be removed by a trained ambulance corpsman, usually in a 2-horse wagon ambulance, to go to the dressing station if they can't walk. Okay, and from the dressing station, that's going to be the first point of triage. If you can walk, if you're just harmed in your arms, maybe a grazed scalp, etc., a burn. If you can walk yourself, you're going to walk to the field hospital. If you cannot walk, there's going to be immediate care taken at that dressing station, and you're going to be moved to a field hospital. The difference is that a dressing station can move. It's going to stay close to the line of battle, and you're going to have a trained assistant surgeon, you may have a steward, you may have a nurse, etc., that are going to identify the best way to help people and who gets moved on to the next level, or who may be shirking and get sent back to the front lines. From the dressing station, which moves, you go to a field hospital. Field hospital is still going to be somewhat mobile, but it's meant to be more of a permanent place. That way you can identify and find it quickly. There's a lot of accounts on dressing stations and field hospitals getting overwhelmed during battle, but for the most part, a field hospital is going to be located far enough away from the battle line that it's not going to need to move. It's going to be safe from small arms fire and from large cannon fire, about a mile and a half away. And it's also generally expected and understood that you don't fire on hospitals. And they have flags and other markers to identify where a field hospital is. Okay, so once you get to a field hospital, that's where you're going to get the major of your care. If it's too serious, you're going to be sent to a general hospital. Generally speaking, there are like rail lines where they have cars that can move the injured quickly up to another hospital, or maybe put on a boat to move quickly, or just an ambulance train to get them moved as quickly as possible to a general hospital. And a general hospital is going to be where you get your specialized service. Amputations are probably going to happen at a field hospital, right? But the aftercare and maybe some more unique, severe cases get sent to a general hospital. So that's the triage system. How does this work with the ambulance corps? Well, because of Jonathan Letterman's General Orders 147, we're going to be able to use that triage system efficiently because we have trained ambulance corpsmen. We also have breakdown specifically by rank and who's going to be involved in this ambulance corps. It didn't say to begin with in 147, but it was understood that the medical officers would handpick the ambulance corpsmen. They could deny. It wasn't until General Orders 85, though, where that was written on paper, and it was specific that a medical officer could decline a hand-picked soldier in case some company officer just wanted to get rid of a slacker onto him again. And they could be fired at any will, right? There's some really good perks that comes with ambulatory service, though, too. All right, so I mentioned 85. Now that we're up to this point, in 1863, right after the Battle of Gettysburg, in August, there's going to be General Orders 85. And General Orders 85 is going to define Jonathan Letterman's plan even more in more detail and give clear instruction to the Army of Potomac that this is how it's going to be. That way there's no question about it. If you get a chance, I would strongly urge you read Surgeon in Blue, because this gives you a basic general history of the medical department during the American Civil War, and it has a lot of really good details about it, so you can kind of see a timeline on how things progressed. So on page 197, if you have this book and you want to follow along, towards the bottom, August became an opportunity for Letterman to complete his vision of how a wounded soldier should be treated when he fell on the battlefield. In less than 2 years, he had organized an ambulance corps on the battlefield. He had instituted a more comprehensive tiered hospital system. He had elevated preventative medicine to a priority that became the responsibility of line officers. Systemization and accountability had been the cornerstones of each milestone. It became time to instill greater accountability and a true sense of military organization within the fledgling ambulance corps. Military discipline had to be as fully inculcated into the medical department as it was in the Army's cavalry or artillery. The logic of Letterman's next phase of reorganization in battlefield medicine appealed to Meade, the former civil engineer. Remember how I said in the last video how McClellan was a man for detail? Well, Meade was also a man for detail, and Jonathan Letterman was a fantastic planner. On August 24th, 1863, General Meade issued General Orders Number 85, written by Letterman. The mandate overlaid military organization onto the Army of the Potomac's ambulance system. A captain became responsible for the entire ambulance corps, a first lieutenant in charge of each division's ambulance allotment, a second lieutenant responsible in each brigade, and a sergeant became responsible for each regiment. The new regulations delineated the duties of each to avoid any miscommunication and assign responsibility. The captain became responsible for the condition of the entire corps' ambulances. He was required to conduct training drills that included the proper way to pick up a wounded man and place him in the standard two-wheel ambulance. The captain ensured ambulances were not used for any other purpose, including those dictated by the whims of line officers. Letterman also required weekly and monthly inspection reports, as well as reports following every battle. The first lieutenant at the division level became an acting quartermaster. He issued his ambulances by receipt and commanded a staff that included a blacksmith with a cavalry forge and saddler. In one stroke, Letterman had eliminated much of this medical department's dependence on the Army's quartermaster. He also had taken the logistical management of ambulances out of the hands of his medical officers and placed it in the hands of officers solely responsible for those ambulances. The order also required 2 medical officers and 2 assistants to accompany each division's ambulances when on the march. Their job was to make sure only the sick and wounded rode in ambulances and that line officers did not appropriate the ambulances for other purposes. Generally speaking, from my reading of examples, that the assistants tended to be nurses. When in camp, the order also established stable standards for the ambulance horses and set specific requirements for ambulance maintenance. Letterman considered recognition of newly elevated corps vital. This in part required an ambulance corps insignia, and Meade's order also established a specific insignia for ambulance corps sergeants and privates. This corps will be designated for sergeants by a green band, 1 1/4 inches broad around the cap and chevrons of the same material, with the point towards the shoulder, on each arm above the elbow. For privates, by a band the same as for sergeants around the cap, and a half chevron of the same material on each arm above the elbow. Letterman went one step further. He purchased red, white, and blue flags consistent with each division's flag to be displayed at the front of each division's ambulance train. Division medical officers received unique flags as well. His ambulance corps now had clearly designated and largely independent authority, standards of accountability, and a unified organization. But as Letterman's ongoing reorganization of the medical corps neared completion, Letterman's longtime mentor, William Hammond, was losing his grip on the Surgeon General's post. Hammond's fate could greatly influence whether key appointees such as Letterman, who also often were his friends, would keep their job. So there's this constant battle between Surgeon General Hammond and Edwin Stanton. And not long after General Order 85, Hammond's going to lose his job. Letterman's actually going to resign his commission soon after, pretty much as soon as he establishes the ambulance corps in a more absolute detail. So in my last video, I showed you my uniform of wearing a sack coat and my hat. and that's what an ambulance corpsman of the Army of the Potomac would wear. Something I didn't mention is that an ambulance corpsman is going to be detached service. So just like a nurse, for a frock coat, your dress uniform, you would wear the piping and the color of your branch. So if your infantry is going to be blue, if it's artillery is going to be red, if it's cavalry is going to be that yellow. And again, you're detached service, but unlike nurses where you're paid through the medical department, the ambulance system is going to still get paid through the regiment. So when you muster for pay, you're going to line up with your regiment and you're going to get pay. You don't get that extra 25 cents a day like nurses did. But still, you're hand-picked, and there's some of the nice perks that comes along with it. Now that we've got 147 and General Orders 85 explained in detail, let's take a look at the logistics. And if you go on Mr. Dyer's Musings Facebook page, I'll actually have this file on that page so you can take a look at it and use it for your own resource. I took all the numbers from 147 and 85 and I broke them down because looking at numbers just, I think, helps grasp more detail about how this is going to look. So a regiment has 10 companies or 1,000 men and is commanded by a colonel. If the unit had 4 to 8 companies, it was a battalion. There was a sergeant for each regiment. There were 4 total wagons, 1 transport cart, 1 4-horse, and 2 2-horse. Men involved, aside from officers, were 10 privates. There were 7 horses, 6 stretchers, and 30 gallons of water because the ambulances had the water. Brigade was 4 regiments or 4,000 men commanded by a brigadier general. There was a second lieutenant for a brigade. There were 16 total wagons, 4 transport carts, 4 4-horse ambulances, 8 2-horse ambulances. There were 40 privates, 4 sergeants. There were 36 horses, 24 stretchers, and 120 gallons of water. For a division, there was 3 to 5 brigades or 12,000 men commanded by a major general. There was a first lieutenant to each division responsible for the ambulance corps. For the lower levels, 48 to 80 total wagons. There were 12 to 20 transport carts, 12 to 24 horse ambulances, 24 to 42 horse ambulances. There were 120 to 200 privates, 12 to 20 sergeants, and 3 to 5 second lieutenants. There were 108 horses to 180 horses, 72 to 120 stretchers, 360 to 600 gallons of water. And for a corps, there were 3 divisions or 36,000 men. That's a lot of men. Was commanded by a major general. 1 captain to each Army Corps as commandant of the ambulance corps. There was 144 to 240 total wagons, 36 to 60 transport carts, 36 to 64 horse ambulances, 72 to 120 2-horse ambulances, 360 to 540 privates, 36 to 60 sergeants, 9 to 15 second lieutenants, and 3 first lieutenants. There were 320 to 540 horses, 288 to 360 stretchers, and 780 to 1,800 gallons of water. So there's the logistics. Again, I'll put it on Mr. Dyer's Musings page. Now, in my next video on the ambulance corps, I'm actually going to talk specifically about the flag, and I'm going to talk about some more specific examples to give you artifact-wise of how to build an impression of an ambulance corpsman and some things that you might see in an ambulance. So I hope you check out my next video as well. If you like this one, please like it. Please subscribe to my channel, help it grow, spread the love, share it, and I am going to catch you guys on my next video, part 3 of the Union Ambulance Corps. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. Give a kiss and hug to your loved ones. Take care.